The ground trembled as Jack sprinted through the ruins, his breath ragged, his heart pounding. His boots crunched over shattered glass and broken metal, but he didn't dare slow down. They were close. Too close. Behind him, Lisa and Tom struggled to keep up, their faces pale with exhaustion. The Veltari were hunting them, and no one had ever survived a Veltari hunt. Jack stole a glance over his shoulder. The sky above was a deep, haunting red, flickering with the eerie glow of distant fires. The Veltari had raised this colony years ago, leaving nothing but ruins and death in their wake. Now, they had returned, not for conquest, but for sport. A piercing shriek echoed in the distance. The sound made Jack's stomach drop. It was a Veltari signal, they had been spotted. Keep moving. Jack growled, grabbing Lisa's arm and pulling her forward. They darted between the remnants of buildings, through the rusted skeletons of what had once been homes. The air was thick with the smell of decay. Every corner felt like a trap. No one had ever outrun the Veltari. Then, as they turned into what had once been a marketplace, Lisa suddenly stopped, gasping. A distress beacon. It sat among the rubble, blinking weakly. Ancient human technology, covered in dust, but still functioning. Tom frowned. That's impossible. This colony was wiped out years ago. Who turned this on? Lisa hesitated before stepping forward. Her fingers hovered over the device. Jack swallowed. Lisa, don't. Too late. The moment her fingers brushed against it, the beacon let out a low hum. The sound crawled under Jack's skin. It wasn't calling for help. It wasn't a warning. It was a lure. A trap. Tom cursed, backing away. We have to leave. Now. But then came another sound, a deep, guttural growl. Jack's blood turned ice cold. It wasn't coming from the Veltari. Something else was here. Something that even the Veltari feared. And for the first time since this nightmare began, the hunters were no longer hunting. They were running. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the chase itself. Jack's breath hitched as he turned his head slowly, scanning the ruins around them. The Veltari, fearless, ruthless killers, were retreating. Their sleek, dark armor blended with the shadows as they disappeared into the crumbling structures, their red eyes darting in every direction. They were afraid. Lisa tightened her grip on Jack's arm. "What's happening?" she whispered. Tom clenched his fists, his voice a low growl. "The Veltari don't run. They hunt." Jack nodded. That was the problem. If the Veltari were running, then whatever was here with them was worse. The distress beacon's hum intensified, sending vibrations through the ground. Jack took a step back, yanking Lisa with him. "We need to move. Now." Lisa hesitated, her eyes flicking back to the beacon. "What if it's another survivor?" Jack shook his head. "No one survives here." Tom gritted his teeth. "Then who turned it on?" A sharp clank echoed from above. All three of them snapped their heads up. A shadow shifted along the skeletal remains of a high-rise, moving fast, impossibly fast. It leaped across the ruins, its motion smooth, calculated. The air grew thick with tension, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on them. Jack's pulse pounded. It wasn't a Veltari. Lisa's breath came in shallow gasps. "It's watching us." Jack swallowed hard. "No. Not watching. Studying." Whatever it wasn't just hunting. It was learning. The Veltari's fear. A sudden snarl erupted from the far end of the ruins. A Veltari soldier, taller than any human, clad in dark armor, and wielding a plasma spear, stumbled backward, eyes wide. Something dragged him into the darkness. The soldier didn't scream. He didn't even fight back. He was just gone. Lisa let out a strangled gasp. Oh my God. Jack's muscles locked. The Veltari were not just fleeing. They were being hunted. The shadows shifted again, and Jack caught a glimpse of movement. A figure, larger than a human, but not quite alien, crouched low on the rubble, its head tilting slightly as if listening. Its body was wrapped in tattered, dark material, blending into the ruins. Then it moved. Fast. Another Veltari let out a sharp, choked noise before being pulled into the darkness. The sound of bones snapping followed. Tom took a slow step backward. We have to go. Right now. Jack's mind raced. He had seen Veltari hunts before. He had seen them rip through human colonies like paper. But this? This was something different. For the first time in his life, he saw pure fear in the eyes of the Veltari. They were prey now. The message in blood. Lisa grabbed Jack's wrist. Look. Her voice trembled as she pointed toward a nearby wall. Scrawled in dark, dried human blood were 4 words. Do not run. Jack's stomach twisted. Tom whispered, his face pale. What the hell does that mean? Before Jack could answer, another Veltari screeched in agony. And from the darkness, something laughed. Twist ending. The hunters had become the hunted. And they weren't the ones in control anymore. The laughter slithered through the ruins like a whisper in the dark. It wasn't human. It wasn't Veltari. It was something else. Jack's entire body tensed as the chilling sound faded into silence. The air felt thicker, heavier, like the ruins themselves were waiting. Lisa gripped his sleeve, her voice barely audible. Jack, what is that? Tom's fingers curled around the grip of his rifle, but Jack knew it was useless. Whatever was out there wasn't afraid of them. It was only playing. Then, from deep within the shadows, a voice. They don't listen. Jack's breath caught in his throat. It was a human voice. The message in the darkness. Jack turned sharply, scanning the ruins, but he saw nothing. Just shifting shadows and the distant, dying echoes of the Veltari's retreat. Lisa's face paled. Who said that? Tom exhaled sharply, eyes darting across the ruined landscape. No one's here. Jack's instincts screamed at him to move, but he forced himself to stay still. Whoever, or whatever, was speaking had remained hidden for a reason. Then the voice came again. You don't run. Lisa sucked in a breath. Jack could feel her trembling beside him. Why? Jack called out. His voice was steady, but every muscle in his body was screaming at him to get the hell out of there. A long pause. Then, movement. Not from the ruins. Not from above. From beneath them. The ground shuddered, dust rising in slow, twisting tendrils. The ruins breathed. Then, from behind a pile of rubble, something stepped forward. It was humanoid. Taller than Jack, but thin. Wrapped in tattered, reinforced armor, covered in old human military insignias. Its face was hidden beneath a shattered helmet, but its eyes, dim, unnatural, burned. Lisa gasped. Oh my God. The figure tilted its head, watching them. Then it whispered. Because when you run, you become prey. The horror of the hollow ones. Jack took a slow step forward, barely breathing. Who are you? The figure didn't answer. Instead, it raised one hand. The fingers, once human, were twisted. Stretched. Something wasn't right. Then the ground cracked open. From the darkness below, they came. Long, sinewy limbs. Twisted human forms. Skin stretched too thin over jagged, unnatural bones. Their faces, barely recognizable, were frozen in silent screams. Lisa staggered backward, shaking her head. What the hell is that? The Veltari, once proud hunters, broke into a full sprint. They didn't try to fight. They didn't turn back. They ran. But Jack knew the truth. There was nowhere to run. The twisted figures moved. Faster than any human. Faster than the Veltari. They didn't just kill. They absorbed. One Veltari let out a choked cry as three of the creatures swarmed him, their arms wrapping around him like living shadows. His body twisted unnaturally. Bones cracked. His armor caved in. Then, in a sickening silence, he was gone. No blood. No remains. Just, nothing. Jack's stomach twisted. This wasn't a hunt. This was something worse. Something that even the Veltari feared. Lisa grabbed Jack's arm, her nails digging into his skin. Jack, we need to go. Jack took one last look at the twisted creatures before turning to the lone figure still watching them. What are they? The figure, once human, now something else, tilted its head again. Then, in a voice barely more than a whisper, it answered. The Hollow Ones. Twist ending. The Hollow Ones didn't just hunt. They were made. And the worst part? They used to be human. The words, the Hollow Ones, clung to the air like a curse. Jack felt Lisa's grip tighten on his arm, her fingers ice cold. Tom's voice was barely above a whisper. They used to be human. The figure, tall, ragged, wrapped in the remnants of old military armor, nodded slowly. Jack's gut twisted. If they were once human, then what the hell had turned them into this? From behind them, a Veltari let out a strangled, guttural scream. The Hollow Ones had caught another. Jack didn't turn around. He already knew what he'd see. Instead, he did the only thing that made sense. Tell us everything. The secret of the ruins. The figure stood motionless for a long moment, as if deciding whether Jack was even worth answering. Then, finally, in a voice dry and hollow, it spoke. This colony wasn't destroyed. It was abandoned. Lisa frowned. No, that's not true. The Veltari attacked. Yes. The figure's head tilted slightly. But not before the humans left. Jack felt a cold chill crawl down his spine. The humans, left? No one had ever heard of a colony being voluntarily abandoned, especially not one this large. Tom's jaw clenched. Why? The figure's gaze turned toward the massive underground cracks in the earth, the same ones the Hollow Ones had emerged from. Because they created something they couldn't control. Jack exchanged a quick glance with Lisa. His pulse hammered. The Hollow Ones. The figure nodded. They were never supposed to be like this. They were an experiment. An evolution of humanity. Stronger, faster. Designed to survive against the Veltari. Tom let out a sharp breath. A super soldier program. More than that, the figure said. It was meant to be the next step. Lisa swallowed hard. But something went wrong. The figure's dim, unnatural eyes locked onto her. They forgot what it meant to be human. The truth buried beneath. Jack's stomach churned. He had heard rumors of secret military experiments before, programs where humans were pushed beyond their limits to fight against alien threats. But this? This was something worse. Tom took a step forward. Who are you? The figure hesitated. Then, slowly, it reached up and removed its shattered helmet. Beneath the mask was a face, pale, scarred, but unmistakably human. His skin was lined with unnatural black veins, his eyes dimly glowing from whatever had been done to him. But he was still human. Jack exhaled. You were part of it. The man nodded. I was one of the first. Lisa's voice was barely audible. How did you survive? A bitter, almost humorless chuckle escaped the man's lips. I didn't. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, Jack squared his shoulders. How do we stop them? The man studied him, as if searching for something in Jack's face. Then he simply said. You don't. Lisa shook her head. That's not good enough. There has to be a way. Boom. The ground shook violently. A deep rumble echoed from beneath them. Tom cursed. What the hell was that? The man's eyes flickered with something unreadable. The facility. Jack's pulse spiked. What facility? The man didn't answer. Instead, he turned and began walking, toward a massive structure partially buried beneath the ruins. It was old, rusted, but unmistakably human. Lisa hesitated. Are we really going down there? Jack didn't take his eyes off the decayed structure. We don't have a choice. Behind them, the hollow ones were gathering. Watching. They weren't attacking anymore. They were waiting. Waiting to see if Jack and the others would do the one thing no one else had dared. Go inside. The descent into madness. The facility's entrance was barely holding together. Thick steel doors that had once been reinforced were now rusted and weak. The man, the last surviving test subject, placed a hand on the controls. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deep mechanical groan, the doors slid open. A blast of cold, stale air rushed out. The inside was dark, vast, the walls lined with old screens and machines long dead. But at the very end of the room, one console was still active. Jack's heart pounded as they stepped inside. Lisa shivered. It's freezing in here. Tom's eyes darted around the room, his voice low. This place shouldn't have power. The man ignored them. He strode toward the last working console and pressed a few buttons. The screen flickered, then displayed something that made Jack's blood run cold. A human face. Or at least, it used to be. Half of it was melted, fused with metal and organic matter. Its mouth didn't move, but a garbled, broken voice filled the room. Project Genesis, status. Contaminated. Jack's breathing became shallow. Contaminated? Lisa backed away. What does that mean? The man turned to them, his expression unreadable. It means this place isn't abandoned. Jack's entire body went rigid. Something was still alive down here. Twist ending. The facility wasn't just a graveyard of old experiments. It was the birthplace of something worse. And it was waking up. The lights flickered again, casting long, eerie shadows across the room. The faint hum of machinery was the only sound, an unsettling reminder that something was alive in this forsaken place. Jack's skin crawled as his gaze flickered to the console. The half-melted face on the screen stared back at him, its eyes dull, lifeless, yet somehow aware. Project Genesis, status. Contaminated. Lisa recoiled, gripping Jack's arm. What does that mean, contaminated? Jack shook his head. I don't know, but whatever it is, it's still down here. Tom moved closer to the console, his hands trembling. It looks like a person. Some kind of person. The man who had been guiding them, the last of the human test subjects, stood silently by the console. His eyes were distant, staring at the screen as if lost in thought. Jack took a step toward him. What happened here? What did they do to you? The man didn't respond immediately. His voice, when it came, was slow, as though dredging up painful memories. They pushed too far. They tried to create something that could fight the Veltari, but they lost control. He looked at the group, his eyes hollow, the hint of something darker in them. We became the experiment. Lisa's face turned pale. What are you saying? They made you, like the hollow ones? The man nodded. The hollow ones. They're the result. The others, they didn't survive the process. They became something else. But I remember it. I remember being human. Once. Jack took a deep breath. We need to get out of here. If this is where it all started, then this place is more dangerous than we thought. But just as he turned toward the door, a low, mechanical rumble echoed from deep within the facility. The walls vibrated, and the screen flickered violently, as if reacting to something. Tom's hand instinctively reached for his rifle. What was that? Before anyone could answer, the ground trembled beneath them. Then, with an ear-splitting crash, the facility's doors slammed shut. We're locked in, Lisa gasped. Jack spun around, panic rising. We have to get out. Now. But the hum of machinery was growing louder, the walls vibrating with increasing intensity. And then, from the depths of the facility, came the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Something is coming, Tom said, his voice barely above a whisper. Jack felt his blood freeze. We're not alone. The hunters are coming. The footsteps echoed louder, closer now. But they weren't the slow, deliberate steps of the hollow ones. These were something quicker. Smarter. It's the hollow ones, Lisa whispered, her voice trembling. They've found us. No, Jack thought, shaking his head. The hollow ones were slower, disjointed, primitive. Whatever was coming toward them, it was different. Suddenly, the lights went out. No! Lisa cried out, her voice panicked. Jack felt the darkness close in, the weight of the unknown pressing against him. The sound of footsteps grew louder, closer, until the very air seemed to hum with the presence of something alive, something that wasn't supposed to be. Then, the emergency lights flickered on, bathing the room in a dim, sickly green glow. Jack's eyes locked on the far corner of the room, where a figure stood, unmoving. The figure wasn't human. It wasn't Veltari. It was something in between. It had the shape of a human, but its limbs were long, its fingers impossibly thin, reaching toward them with an unsettling grace. Its face was distorted. One eye was completely black, the other glowed with a sickly green hue. Its mouth was open, too open, as if something inside it was still growing. No, Jack whispered. No, no, no. The creature took a step forward, its limbs twitching. The hollow ones were no longer the greatest threat. This thing was. The chase begins. Before Jack could react, the creature lunged. Its speed was unnatural. It was upon them in an instant, its clawed hands reaching for Jack's throat. He barely had time to dodge, throwing himself backward as the creature's claws scraped across the air where his face had been seconds before. Lisa screamed, her voice sharp and filled with terror. Tom fired his rifle at the creature, but the bullet seemed to pass through it like smoke, having no effect. The thing twisted, slamming into the wall with an unnatural, sickening thud, before rising again, completely unscathed. Jack grabbed Lisa's hand, pulling her toward the back of the room. Move! Now! They ran blindly, their footsteps echoing through the long, narrow corridors of the facility. Behind them, the creature screeched, a sound that made Jack's skin crawl. The air seemed to pulse with its presence, like the very walls were alive. Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to shift, the floor cracking open in random places. The walls groaned as if the facility itself was fighting to contain the creature. They couldn't outrun it. The exit! Jack shouted, pointing toward a faint light ahead. But just as they neared it, another creature appeared, faster, stronger, more relentless than the first. Lisa gasped, her breath catching. We're trapped. Tom raised his rifle again, but Jack could see the hopelessness in his eyes. The bullets weren't going to stop them. Jack's mind raced, and then it clicked. The self-destruct system. Lisa's eyes widened. What? Are you crazy? But Jack was already moving, pulling them toward a control panel on the far side of the room. The system was still active, but they had to act fast. Behind them, the creatures closed in, their eyes glowing with malevolent intent. They were relentless, and they were hungry. Twist ending. Jack slammed his hand against the console. A countdown began. Run. They sprinted toward the exit, the creatures hot on their heels. The walls seemed to close in as the ground cracked open beneath their feet. The self-destruct had begun, and there was no time left. The facility began to implode, collapsing in on itself. As they burst through the final door, the ground exploded behind them, sending shockwaves through the ruins. The blast lifted them off their feet, throwing them into the dirt and dust. But they were alive. For now. And as the facility crumbled behind them, Jack knew one thing for certain: there would be no running from this. Not anymore. The world around them seemed to shudder and collapse as the explosion sent debris flying into the air. Jack's body slammed into the ground, the impact knocking the breath from his lungs. His vision blurred, his mind dazed, but he forced himself to move, crawling toward Lisa, who had landed a few feet away. "Lisa," he shouted, scrambling toward her. She groaned, pushing herself up on shaky arms. "I'm fine, just get up." Jack reached out to pull her to her feet, but the ground beneath them continued to shake, the echoes of the self-destruct still reverberating through the ruins. They didn't have much time. Tom was already on his feet, scanning the horizon. "We need to move. Fast. Those creatures won't be stopped by an explosion." Jack nodded. They had barely escaped the crumbling facility, but the hollow ones, or whatever they were becoming, were still out there. And the creatures? They didn't seem to care about the destruction. They would follow, relentless in their pursuit. "Where do we go?" Lisa asked, her voice tinged with fear. Tom pointed toward the distant hills. "There's a ridge up ahead. We'll have a better chance of defending ourselves if we can get there first." They began running again, each step weighted with exhaustion and the understanding that time was running out. The creatures were relentless, but Jack had learned something during their harrowing escape: humanity's strength wasn't just in fighting. It was in survival. They had to make their stand now, or everything they had endured would be for nothing. A moment of reflection. As they sprinted across the barren landscape, Jack couldn't help but think of everything that had brought them here: the colony, the abandoned experiments, the Veltari's fear. The hollow ones weren't just a threat, they were a twisted reflection of human ambition gone wrong. "Why?" Jack muttered under his breath. "Why did they do it?" Lisa, struggling to keep up, managed a weak smile. "Because we always think we can control things, Jack. But we can't. Sometimes, we forget what makes us human." Her words lingered in Jack's mind as they crested the ridge. Below them, they could see the remnants of the ruined colony stretching out across the wasteland. The facility was gone, but the creatures would continue to haunt them. They wouldn't stop. Not until they were all consumed. Jack stopped for a moment, catching his breath. "We can't outrun them. Not forever." Tom looked grim. "No. We can't." But as the wind howled across the ridge, Jack's eyes narrowed. "Then we fight. We fight until there's nothing left. Until they understand that humanity doesn't run. We never run." Lisa nodded, determination flashing in her eyes. "We're not giving up." The stand. They made their final preparations, scrounging through the remnants of old weapons scattered across the battlefield. There was no time for tactics, no time for strategy. It was all or nothing. Jack's grip tightened around the weapon in his hand, a makeshift rifle crafted from parts of the facility's destroyed equipment. It wasn't much, but it was something. And something was all they had. The first of the creatures appeared on the horizon. Then another. Then more, emerging from the darkness like ghosts, their glowing eyes fixed on the trio. The Veltari had fled, but this? This was a different kind of battle. It wasn't about survival anymore. It was about sending a message. The Hollow Ones approached, slow at first, as if testing them. But then, as the wind picked up, they rushed forward, faster than anything Jack had ever seen. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the fight. "We stand here, now. Together," Jack said, his voice firm, resolute. "And we show them what humanity is made of." Tom raised his weapon, and Lisa, her face set in grim determination, stood beside him. The creatures closed in, their unnatural forms moving like shadows. The first one lunged. Jack fired. The bullet struck the creature's chest, but it didn't fall. It barely slowed down. Jack fired again. And again. Each shot felt like a futile gesture, the hollow sound of the gunshot echoing across the open field. The creatures were too fast, too powerful. Lisa screamed as one of the creatures reached for her, its claws slashing through the air. She swung her weapon, but it was knocked out of her hands, sending her crashing to the ground. "No!" Jack shouted, charging forward. He tackled the creature before it could finish her off, his fist slamming into its face, but it was like punching steel. It barely flinched. The creature retaliated with a brutal swipe, sending Jack flying backward, his chest exploding with pain. Tom's voice echoed through the chaos. "Get up! Get up, Jack!" Jack staggered to his feet, blood streaming down his face. He looked around. Lisa was struggling to get back to her feet, her eyes wild with fear. Tom was already engaged in a brutal fight with one of the creatures, his rifle barely keeping it at bay. In that moment, Jack realized something. They weren't going to win this fight. But they could survive it. They just had to make them remember. Humanity's spirit couldn't be crushed by mere violence. It was something more. Something that couldn't be broken. Twist ending, the true fight. In a final surge of energy, Jack lunged at the creature that had knocked him down earlier. His fist connected with its jaw, and for the first time, the creature flinched. It stepped back, its glowing eye flickering. Then something unbelievable happened. The creature stopped. It looked at him, a spark of recognition in its dark eyes. And then, it retreated. The others followed. One by one, they backed away, their glowing eyes dimming as they vanished into the shadows. Jack stood, breathless, in the midst of the battlefield. They had survived. But at what cost? The Hollow Ones weren't just hunters. They were evolved humans, the product of a twisted, failed experiment. But in the end, humanity had won. Not through strength. But through will. The wind was still howling, the remnants of the battlefield scattered around them. Jack, Lisa, and Tom stood together, watching the empty horizon. The creatures had retreated into the shadows, leaving them alive, for now. But they all knew something had changed. They weren't out of danger, not yet. The Hollow Ones, and whatever else had been born from humanity's desperation, still lurked out there, waiting. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time since the horror had begun, there was a glimmer of hope. It was fleeting, but it was there. Lisa wiped her blood-streaked face with the back of her hand, her voice quiet but determined. "Did we win?" Jack didn't answer immediately. He watched the horizon, as though searching for something, some sign that they were truly free, or at least, free for the moment. "We're alive," Jack said finally, his voice rough. "That's a win." But deep inside, he knew it wasn't that simple. No one could ever return to the world they'd known. The experiment, the Hollow Ones, the Veltari, everything had changed. And yet, in that moment, standing on the edge of destruction, Jack realized something fundamental. It's not about what we've lost, he said, more to himself than to anyone else. It's about what we still have. Tom turned, his eyes filled with uncertainty, yet there was something else there too. Something more human than before. What do we have, Jack? Jack paused, letting the silence hang in the air before he spoke again. We have each other. He gestured to Lisa, who was still wiping the blood from her arms, and then to Tom, who was staring off into the distance, his hands trembling but steady. We have our will to survive, our ability to keep going. And we have something the Hollow Ones didn't have anymore. We have our humanity. Tom let out a small breath, looking down at the ground. Humanity, he repeated, as though testing the word. Lisa stepped forward, her voice stronger now. And we won't let anyone, anything, take that from us. Ever again. Jack nodded, and for the first time since this nightmare began, he allowed himself to feel something other than fear. Hope. Hope that no matter how much humanity had been pushed, no matter how far they had fallen into darkness, they would always rise. The truth about survival. The trio sat down on the ground, leaning against the wreckage of a broken building, their bodies weary but still full of life. Their survival wasn't just a matter of escape. It was a matter of defiance. As they rested, Jack's mind drifted back to the earlier moments in the facility, the half-melted face, the haunting scream of the Hollow Ones. But those memories weren't what stayed with him now. What stayed with him was the lesson. Humanity wasn't about power, or strength, or even survival, it was about the ability to endure. They had been tested, pushed to their limits, and yet here they were. They were still human. And that was enough. Lisa spoke softly, breaking the silence. Do you think there will be more of them? More Hollow Ones, I mean? Jack thought for a moment, the question weighing heavily on him. I don't know, he said. But what I do know is that we'll be ready. We've faced the worst, and we're still here. We've seen what happens when humanity forgets its own heart, and we'll fight to keep it. Whatever comes next, we'll stand together. And if we fall, Jack's eyes met Lisa and Tom's, and a slow, determined smile spread across his face. We'll rise again. The lesson for all time. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the destroyed landscape, Jack realized something. The worst had already happened. They had faced the unimaginable, and yet they had survived. They had fought not with weapons or violence, but with their resolve, their spirit, their unyielding belief in themselves and in each other. That was the true strength of humanity. They were more than survivors. They were the embodiment of hope. Jack, Lisa, and Tom stood together as the night crept in, the stars slowly coming into view. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew one thing for sure, no matter what came, they would always carry with them the heart of humanity. And that was something no experiment, no alien threat, no monster could ever destroy. The end, and the beginning. Jack looked to the stars, a sense of peace settling over him, knowing that whatever happened next, they would be ready. Humanity wasn't defined by its fall, it was defined by its rise.